Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our weekly podcast. And this week, we're going to talk about DAOs or Decentralized Autonomous Organization. So, if you're someone who's passionate about clean government, good corporate governance, and greater transparency in organizational management, you will also find this topic interesting. So, before we start talking about DAOs and then how they can possibly encourage more transparency and clean government, we will talk about centralized systems first because I think people are more familiar with centralized systems, which is how most organizations are being run nowadays. As we all know, in centralized systems, these organizations rely on one single authority, and then there's a greater possibility for these powerful entities in this organization to just be not transparent about their processes, to keep their processes under wraps, which can pave way for greater corruption and greater intransparency in the company or in the organization. Like for instance, like if the finance director doesn't want to share the financial reports to everybody in the organization because like he can do it because he has lots of power, then possibly he can misuse some of the funds or some of the budgets that owed by the organization. And also this is also quite rampant in governments as well. The DAOs can possibly change this secrecy and give more transparency to everyone involved in the organization because the DAOs are run on peer-to-peer network, whereas all the documents and all the data stored in that network are transparent and visible to everyone in the network. So like all the participants can be involved in making decisions about all the processes that are going on in the organization. So like they can also determine collectively what's best for them because as we all know in centralized systems, usually the powerful authorities, the central authorities make the decision, but then like when there are some fallouts from that decision, usually the other members have to bear the brunt of the fallout, which is not fair. But then like in DAOs, we can reduce such possibilities while we can also promote more clean management and prevent corruption. So what is it about the DAOs that we can promote transparency? I will talk to our blockchain Zoo CEO, Roberto Capodieci, who will help us understand about how DAOs work. So good morning, Roberto.
Good morning.
Okay, first of all, can you explain what are DAOs and then like how do they differ from the centralized systems?
Sure. The DAO is a concept that came out together with the smart contracts, right? So once a smart contract is programmed and is deployed on the blockchain, cannot be touched anymore. It can execute with the rules that have been put there when it's been deployed and cannot be modified. The idea that the smart contract become complex to the point to offer a service, to offer a functionality that is useful for the users, transform to the point where the DAO can have all the functionality of an actual organization, but being autonomous in terms of there is no need of external influence in order to make things run properly. The first concept of DAO was a smart contract to do crowdfunding, where the code was deployed there and people would be able to deposit funds, vote for what project the funds should go to, and automatically then collect the dividends that this project was generating as revenue. It can go to incredible extremes. The concept, for example, surfers want to go and see how the waves are before leaving home with their surfboard, okay? Let's suppose that there is a camera that moves and zoom in the different spots from a small hill next to a surf destination. This camera has electricity consumption that has to be paid, like an electric bill that has to be paid. Has a viewer that go in that need to be charged for using the camera to see where the waves are and how they are. And this is a service that has its revenue and its cost in an IoT device that is a camera. This could become a DAO in terms of having a billing functionality where people pay in order to use the service, and then a payment in order to support its own maintenance and its own electricity, internet bills that need to be paid monthly. And nobody will need to come there and interfere with this system because it's an autonomous business. Another interesting example that has been done with the smart contract as an autonomous functionality, an autonomous system, was insurance for flight delays. So people is going to take a flight and make a deposit into the smart contract saying the flight number that is going to take, and put the deposit as an insurance paid. The DAO will go check the flight schedule, which is public information. If the flight was delayed for more than X hours, automatically there was a payout to the account that was purchasing the insurance. And this was fully autonomous, meaning that there is no need of a third party to process documentation, there is no need of third party to do things, right? And if there is no even revenue that is addressed to one particular account, this system lives its own life, meaning it's deployed there and then people use it, and is self-sustained and is self-balanced out. So DAO is a very interesting and good idea that can move to the extreme, as you were mentioning, of processes that are now in the hand of people inside government or organization, to remove the human aspect into the flow that is well coded and transparent inside a smart contract.
Okay, so what are the most recent use cases of the DAO in terms of management?
Well, I think in a lot of decentralized finance, DeFi, there are a lot of smart contracts that self-sustain, that people use, even though they are deployed by some known company, but sometimes people copy and paste the code, modifying and deploy it on the wild. And those smart contracts are offering a service, for example, loans that are running on their own. So there is no need of a system operator or anything, and the flow, the functionality for those that can read the source code are there and available to be verified.
Okay, so how does the DAO evolve?
DAO evolves when several DAOs are working together. For example, I may have a DAO for managing insurance of the car with the same principle of the insurance of the flight, for example, and the DAO, the management, my purchase of electricity for my electric car, and so on and so forth. So once they start working together and integrating, that start chaining functionalities, creating a small network of logic that people can use. So I can create a smart contract that work on the basis of an existing running smart contract. So information that come from there can be of use for mine to do additional functionalities. And being decentralized means anybody can do that. It's not limited to the guy that coded the first one to authorize a second one to do something else, because smart contract can talk to each other and can query each other information.
What is the connection between DAO and blockchain technology?
Well, that's quite obvious, right? Being a decentralized system, being DAO running as decentralized application or smart contracts, they run on decentralized platform, which blockchain is the main things. This is all born around Ethereum, which is the first evolution after Bitcoin and clones of how a blockchain works, thanks to the smart contracts. Yeah.
Okay. And then there's a definition about DAO, which I found on a blockchain information website. It's called. It says that DAOs involve a set of people interacting with each other according to a self-enforcing open source protocol. So, what is a self-enforcing open source protocol?
Yeah, well, the idea is this. I will edit and correct what it says, because it says people. It's true that an application that is decentralized doesn't make sense unless people use it, right?
Yeah.
So smart contract cannot be triggered by events unless an event is external that push transaction to the smart contract. So a smart contract is generally something that help mediate the work between two parties. So would it be somebody that do something and somebody else that do something else, and there are some rule on how these two parties are interacting with each other, and here comes the smart contract and the DAO. The idea of extending this not only to people but also to Internet of Things, so devices that are coded with the capacity to push transaction to the blockchain or query information from the blockchain, may allow the decentralized application to do certain things. For example, if there is a device that checks the temperature of the air or the weather, and based on that push to the smart contract some information which change the way the smart contract is going to work. For example, an insurance pay more or less based on the weather, I don't know. So in this moment you have a mechanics that is connecting also devices and provide a logic for devices to work together.
Oh, okay. And then what does open source means?
No, the open source means that because the software for a smart contract is published, so everybody can see the source code, right? To understand the logic of how it works. And a protocol is the format of the data for these things to work. So if the smart contract required information from the IoT device to be organized in a certain way, the IoT device needs to follow this format in order to be understood by the smart contract. So once you define a protocol on how data is exchanged, then you need to follow the protocol that is defined in the open source application. So if I'm speaking only Italian, my protocol is the Italian language. If you want to tell something to me and make it so that I understand it, you need to follow the protocol that I have, which is the Italian language, and tell these things to me in Italian. Otherwise, I will look at you and not understand you, right? Same things is when applications talk to each other, right? They follow protocol a format in order to be understood, in order to be compatible, and to make sure that the communication happen in the correct way.
Oh yeah, and then one of the most recent use cases of the DAO system is to facilitate international transactions, because they can transcend geographical boundaries and language barriers because of
well, that international transaction happened since Bitcoin was there, right? So that you don't need a smart contract or a DAO in order to remit coins or money from a place to another. If there is some logic on how this thing has to be, transported, then let's say there is a stablecoin USD and stablecoin Indonesian rupiah, and then the DAO is an exchange for which you submit the USD stablecoin, and you want the other party to receive Indonesian rupiah stablecoin, and there are the balance in the DAO can automatically make the conversion, providing that is making some revenue.
Yeah, so it makes it easier, yeah, when you have to cross different currencies and.
For example, that depends. The smart contract can be coded with everything in the limits of the capacity of the virtual machine and the gas, the processing power limits set to the contract.
Okay.
So which.
Yeah, and then individuals who are making transactions over the DAOs are not bound by legal agreements. So how do they maintain trust in these transactions?
All right. So. This is a little bit a gray area, meaning that there are countries with legislation about using blockchain for several things, so that will bound them to the use of blockchain, for example. But when it comes to the specific smart contract that people interact with, is it a DAO or not, there is no again, unless it's required by the country of origin of the user, there is no agreement to accept before using it, because the smart contract is there to be called from anywhere the user is. Obviously, people would be able to create a smart contract that process a transaction only if there is a field where people type the word "I agree to the term and condition of blah blah blah," and this makes them bound to an agreement if the country where they are require or allow an online agreement to be accepted in such a way. But in general, there is no rule book because there is no registered company behind it, so people can just use an online smart contract without any legal framework around it, unless it's taught differently. For example, somebody can say, okay, this is our decentralized application, but to use it, you need to be an authorized user. The smart contract has a way to flag user to be authorized or not. And to be an authorized user, you need to sign a contract with these people. In that case, yes, you're bound by the contract. It is really flexible, things, right?
Yeah, and then that's also how they govern people's behavior in the DAO. So people will not violate the agreements or the...
So a fully DAO is autonomous, right? So there is no controller or person that can... there is no precise definition on this. Ideally, the DAO is self-sustainable, meaning that nobody has an administrative access that can change a rule and things. When I look at the DAO as a smart contract, then yes, the DAO's definition as a decentralized autonomous organization, the autonomous part make me want to believe that is autonomous, right?
Okay, and then how do blockchains and smart contracts align the interests of all stakeholders who are involved in the DAOs?
That's also opinable, meaning that depends how the DAO is coded, right? But the idea is that there is no censorship, there is no blocking users. But I can say also, for example, I make a DAO where people can make a deposit or can call the DAO if their balance is above $5 million. So if the account that push the transaction has so much coin that will be value $5 million or more, then the transaction is accepted. If the request comes from an account with very little balance, the transaction is bounced. In this way, I'm limiting the use of my decentralized autonomous organization only to wealthy people. So it is opinable the fact that there is no censorship, anybody can access it. Depends how it's coded, but in theory, everybody that match the protocol, that match the rules set up in the smart contract are free to. You don't need to show your ID card or to have a bouncer at the entrance that decide based on his feeling of the moment if you can use the smart contract or not. Once the requirements of the smart contract are met, then the smart contract runs for you.
Oh yeah, so again, it's not always more transparent than the centralized system. So
no, it is transparent, means that you can read the code, so you know exactly that you need to have $5 million to push a transaction. It's not a secret. But you can even put a randomization. You can say randomly every transaction there is one chance out of 10 that is rejected like this because the person that coded the smart contract decided this. There is somebody, for example, that to show how scams happen online, clone a smart contract that everybody uses, put millions of for a decentralized finance functionality, making it changes that every 10 transactions, the depositor, rather than going there, goes to his own account. And obviously he deployed this in a testnet, but you can try, and every 10 it works normally, so you can test this normally, but every 10 function the deposit goes to him rather than in the smart contract, because if you don't read the source code, you don't know how the behavior is set. So you need to be a programmer, or you need to trust a third party that validated the contract as good in order to know that it's safe to use it. So that's the very big thing about a smart contract. Yes, it's open source, but do you have the knowledge to read the source code and know if the code is safe or not? Probably not everybody, right? So unless there is a strong reputation around the smart contract and a website that uses the smart contract or a mobile application that uses the smart contract, or is a little bit a risk unless people know exactly what they're doing, right?
Oh, yeah. And then going back to the issue of transparency and corruption, how will DAOs prevent or minimize the chances of corruption in a system?
Yeah, so I think that in this case, the DAO shouldn't be a smart contract or cannot be a smart contract if the operations are very complex. Let's say to replicate functionality. For example, I'm getting married. To get married, you need to require a lot of documentation from different government entities, right? And sometimes you find the office where people is lazy, they're not desiring to work, or they are messy, they lost data, etc., right? And a process that should take one day end up taking months to be completed, also because some documents expire after a while, so by the time you collect them all and you present them, some are already expired. So if the processes that are done now by humans are based on electronic document and following a code of an application, there is decentralized, but even if it was centralized at this point, we'll make it easier. Where the code is fair, there is no roadblock. There is nobody that says, it's complicated and you need to give the bribe in order to get the coffee money or whatever. Which is illegal in every country of the world, but unfortunately, is the truth. It happened like this. At the same time, for example, in some countries, they put the land registry on the blockchain because corrupted officials were changing the name as if a sale was happening, and then farmers later found out that the land was no more their own, but it belongs to the cousin of the government official that was managing the registry of the land ownership. And a lot of people lost. This happened in Italy, for example, that people wanted to sell their land and discovered that a notary signed a sale and it was a corrupt notary working with organized crime, but a huge piece of land suddenly wasn't their own anymore. And before they claim it back, it took years of, So if all this is regulated with cryptography and in a blockchain in a decentralized manner, this thing doesn't happen in theory, right?
Yeah, because you remove the middleman.
Exactly, you automate, in the term of autonomous, automate the process in a transparent way. So once it's validated, people is sure and safe.
Yeah, I think some countries have also adopted this system for their certificate management. No, not management, issuance processes.
Very
like
poor.
Estonia, for instance.
Estonia is one of the pioneers in Europe for the adoption of new technologies for GovTech, what is called government technologies. They issue their electronic ID for the first, I think, in Europe. There are a few more countries, Lithuania, I think Slovenia, another few that have electronic ID, which have the capability to do cryptographic signatures based on a certificate that they release and they put in the card. And these allow a higher level of security, if you want, because it's difficult to counterfeit, it's impossible to counterfeit a cryptographic signature, while it is possible to counterfeit a handwritten signature. And this also allowed to use this in a lot of other systems. So if a private company or even the government itself want to release certificates, there is no more the need to show yourself in person, show your ID in order to receive the certificate. Once the request is signed with the ID card, automatically the document can be produced and processed. So in this way, yes, they're doing a lot of things, and a lot of government have digital signature, which is cryptographic signature, which is mathematics, is not signing electronically like with your hands. This is different things. So now DocuSign, that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about cryptographic signature. A lot of countries have them. they're not always integrated with the rest of country, bureaucracy, if you want, but they are useful because they are valid signature and they can be done remotely. So, for example, in preparing document for a lawyer from a remote, from the other side of the planet, I can just put my Italian, digital signature and sign this PDF file and send them back, and in court they're valid. So there is no need to be there with the document to validate or go to a notary public to validate the signature.
Yeah, I think in 2017 the Ministry of Population Planning or something like that in Brazil has also adopted the system to manage the land ownership certificate of the people. Yeah. And also in Chicago in the US, so yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so again, to go back to the DAOs, after we're talking about its applications, what is the role of tokens in incentivizing the behaviors of individuals in the DAOs? Like, do tokens play a role here?
And again, this depends what the DAO is about, right? Sometime to promote the development of a DAO, people do an ICO. In the ICO, they create a certain amount of tokens, and this token can be used like the coffee card to use the DAO, right?
Oh, yeah.
So people need to purchase the token in order to send the token to the DAO and use the DAO. Or the token ownership represent if the DAO produces revenue, the token represents the shareholding, if you want, of the DAO. So once the DAO has a revenue that is created, is split between the owner of the token, and if you more token you have, a more part of the revenue you get. So those are different ways the token are used around the DAO to create a financial reality, if you want, but they are not compulsorily needed. That's just a way to collect funds to create the decentralized application.
Oh, okay. Okay, and then like codes are important as always here, but like what happens when there are coding mistakes? Like had this kind of thing happened before?
Smart contracts in general are subject to a big issue, which is the fact that once deployed they cannot be modified anymore. If people claim they can be modified, it's not true. There is a gateway smart contract, so that you call the same smart contract and then it is called a different version. And if somebody can change this, practically centralize the system, because at any point people can change it to a code that is malicious. So an actual piece of code is deployed, and as a rule, no software is perfect at the first deployment. There is always some bugs, some functionality. Because it cannot be modified, if the bugs is allowing somebody to steal the funds rather than blocking the contract from working for some reason, then it is affect all the users that are using it and the money that are deposited in the smart contract. And it happened that people found a way to steal funds and people were sitting there and looking at it, or a small change blocked multi-sig smart contract, and people lost the money because they cannot transfer them out of it anymore. So it is delicate. That's why, in my opinion, smart contracts are good to prototype, but they are not good for production. So, and we are in a phase of prototyping. All DeFi is all, there are a lot of money moving around it, but there is nothing final or definitive, etc., etc.
So once you move to the production side, like
I think a new technology need to come on board that allow decentralized application, allow better governance of the life cycle of an application when it's decentralized. So an application should be able to be edited, debugged until it's mature and then locked so everybody can, like guarantee that there is no changes, but it had enough lifespan. Every application has a alpha version, a beta version, then, So this has to happen also with the decentralized application. Besides, smart contracts are very limited in what they can do, because the processing power allowed to smart contract, the virtual machine instruction set are very limited. While a decentralized application has a full operating system where it can run, so it can do very big and important things. So I think this is a next step in decentralizing the world, and we're working on it. So that's something that DecBC has, in the oven, and already very good way there. But is inevitable as an evolution. Before we got the most modern car, we had a car that started with the spinner in front, right? So we go and we progress. The same thing happened with the centralized application platforms.
Okay. And about the 2018 DAO attack, whereby people lost $300 million or more. I don't know, like I can't remember exactly the figure, but what lessons can we learn from this incident?
Well, exactly it is that no piece of code can be deployed without bugs. No human being is able to determine that a piece of code is perfect. There are no means. In fact, also what people do now is they write a smart contract, and then they give quite a lot of money to some software house or consulting firm that certify the smart contract as good. And then people can use it because they see in their website that there is a small check. And this is silly in a way, because first of all, one of these companies also made their own application which got attacked. So their own code wasn't good. Second, because this is made by humans, and humans are the limitation that we have all around the software, right? So what is worth this certification? To me is worth not much. Obviously better one with the one without for what it means, but also how do you know there is authentic? There is like how you can read the code. There are a lot of issue with this decentralized system, unfortunately. That is gonna be overcome with years.
So it's a good first milestone.
Absolutely.
With the DAOs, it's still not perfect, still has limitations, but then the developers are now working towards improving it, to decentralize.
There is still too much money to be made in just coding smart contract in general, for developers to go down the rabbit hole of making a better technology. So the majority of people is still there coding things, DeFi, new tokens, etc., etc. But there are also those that work in making a better technology. They are less recognized as work because it's more long term and is difficult. It's not so tangible as an application. But it's a necessary step to be done.
Okay. So it's interesting to see like what the future will hold for DAOs, and then of course many thinkers are dreaming of technocracy, as they call it, whereby all the bureaucratic processes are being handled by machines instead of the officials who often make the process more difficult actually.
There should be a programming language made for bureaucracy. That is very easy to transform all the processes of bureaucracy in code, and automatically maybe an application, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or whatever, that help this process of coding. Sometimes it's incredibly complex and incredibly redundant. What bureaucracy requires, but eventually.
And then also it's unfortunate when the budget which can be allocated for people's welfare are being stolen. But that's another conversation. So all in all, it's a really good first step. Okay.
This revolution is all bottom up. Now there are two countries recognizing Bitcoin as official currency for their country. That's a huge step ahead. Consider the Bitcoin is not being created by a large organization, by a government entity, but it came from the people, and now it's getting adopted to government. So probably once a lot of people use decentralized organization to handle some part of their life, then easily it is gonna be recognized and adopted up. So there is a good chance that this happen.
Yeah, it's a good point actually. It's not like a top-down system imposed by, like
Correct.
people on the top, the elites or whatever. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's all. I've asked all my questions. Do you still have anything more to add?
Oh, it is an interesting look into the future. The fact that we are going to have rules that are written. Probably I can see this future view on a government where the lawmakers are debating in the parliament a new smart contract, a new piece of code, and then the prime minister approve it or whatever it is, a process for law that now are designed, they are approved, and then they are put in function. This is gonna go next to a piece of code that make this regulation also a software flow. So that would be nice. Like every politician need to have a minimum preparation in understanding code, and every referendum, every requirement for a new regulation, it has to come with a text for people to understand and read in plain English or whatever language it is. And next to it, there must be the code that refer to this regulation. So if you get arrested for this blah blah blah, then the code underneath process the mechanics of what the law says. And the application of this law has to go through the code and cannot go through interpretation of other. So that in this case, so starting with regular giving a license for opening a bar with alcohol, sales, required blah 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 blah, and the rule is written in the language of the country that it is. The code is international, so even a foreigner can understand the requirement, even don't understand the language. And when people require the license for their bar, this has to go through the code. If he comply with the code, there is no saying no to the license, right? Because the code has to be there. If there is a flaw in this piece of code, then the legislator needs to come up with a new version or an updated version, justifying the reason why, and then the new version is going to be applied. It's as simple as it is, in my opinion.
Going back to an earlier part of our discussion, maybe this is how the DAOs can facilitate a more efficient cross-transnational operations, right? Like because
absolutely, also because yes, if some foreigner decide to invest in another country, can simply go and see the code required to get the different license and know by themselves directly if they can do the investment or not without too much exploring. And also this should stop the bribes, because it doesn't matter how much money you give to somebody, you cannot bypass the fact that the code has to comply with all the electronic documents that you need to have.
Yeah, and then of course it transcends language barriers and also bypasses all the bureaucratic rigmaroles that you have to go through, blah blah blah.
It should facilitate them, because there will be agencies that compile the set of code that you need, so you can automatically test. Can you start this hospital in this country? Please put your own ID, automatically pick up all the documents, require you the authorization to verify, process through the code, and says no. Or yes, or yeah, no, but with these other three things, then yes, And it's instant because code run to the speed of light.
Yeah. Okay, and then like no wonder lots of people, who don't necessarily have technology or computer science as their background, also interested in investigating decentralized systems, like the British YouTuber Russell Brand, for instance, because they actually believe in its power of transforming the way things are being run and make things more efficient, transparent, and all that. So If you want to find out more about like decentralized technology, so be sure to follow our next episodes and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And then if you have questions or suggestions on the topics we should talk about in our next episode, don't forget to leave your comments on the comment section below. So see you again next time.